Hey everyone, welcome back. In this video, we're going to dive in and take an in-depth look at plants. So plants have these key characteristics that set them apart from the rest of the kingdoms. First and foremost, all plants are multicellular. We don't have any unicellular organisms within this kingdom. And all these plants are going to be autotrophic through the way of photosynthesis. So they have photosynthetic pigments like chlorophyll found within their cells. Speaking of their cells, they all have cellulose, which is a polysaccharide of glucose. And this polysaccharide chain has beta linkages. Cellulose fibers are going to be found within the plant cell wall. And plants are unique in terms of their reproduction. They can reproduce both asexually and sexually. And they undergo a process known as alteration of generations. Now we're going to look at this in the next slide. Lastly, here's just a fun fact. Around 90% of the plants out in nature are living with another partner. They have mutual realistic relationships with either bacteria or fungi. Cool, here we have alternation of generations. This is the life cycle found within plants. Now it's called alternation of generations because each subsequent generation of new individuals is going to alternate between being in a haploid, which is 1N, or a diploid, 2N state. Botanists refer to these two stages as the gametophyte stage, which is 1N, meaning you have one set of chromosomes, right? It's haploid, or the sporophyte stage, which is 2N, it's diploid, you have two sets of chromosomes. So let's start with the 2N state, the sporophyte stage. So we are 2N individuals, right? We have two sets of chromosomes. So let's start here. Now, sporophytes are going to release spores through the process known as meiosis. That's where you lose that chromosome number. You go from a 2N state down to just a single 1N state. So these spores are haploid. Now these spores are going to undergo mitotic division. So they undergo mitosis to form the gametophyte stage. But remember, since it came from a spore, a 1N haploid spore, now this individual is going to be within the gametophyte stage, which is also 1N haploid. When an individual is in the gametophyte stage, it's going to release gametes. Now gametes are going to fuse together with other gametes found from another individual. So that's going to make a 2N, a diploid zygote. This zygote, this 2N individual, will continue to grow. So it undergoes mitotic division, and it's in the sporophyte stage right now. It's 2N. There's two sets of chromosomes because it got both of those chromosomes from the gametes released in the gametophyte stage from two unique parental individual plants. And then the process will begin again. You can undergo another round of alternation of generations. But ultimately here you're going to have plants that like to spend their time in either the gametophyte, the 1N stage, or the sporophyte, the 2N stage. So that's the two important things that we need to remember, is that plants are either going to prefer the gametophyte stage or the sporophyte stage within their alternation of generations. This is important for us because taxonomists and botanists use this piece of information, whether they like the gametophyte stage or the sporophyte stage, to classify plants. Many students struggle with plant taxonomy. I know I did. But it can be summarized based on 4 criteria, 4 questions that you need to ask yourself. Once you have these questions down, it's relatively simple and straightforward. The first criteria is the plant body, whether the plant itself is relatively simple or complex. This means it has differentiated body parts. The next thing we ask ourselves is whether or not the plant has a vascular system present or not. Then second to last is seed formation, so whether or not the plant produces seeds. Then lastly is flowers, so if the plant has flowers or not. So we can use these 4 criteria to classify all types of plants on the DAT. Okay, let's begin. So we're starting in the kingdom Plantae and we're looking at that first question that's on plant bodies. So if we don't have any body differentiation in the plant, it's known as a thallophyte. On the other hand, if we do have body differentiation, complex body parts, were known as a bryophyte or a tracheophyte. Let's first look at thallophytes. So the easiest way to remember what a thallophyte is to think about algae. We've talked about what algae is. We're going to look at that again in a second. But algae can be classified as many different types of life. It's an informal taxonomic classification. But just simply put, that thallophytes are the simplest form of plants. They're simple because they don't have any differentiated body structures, there's no vascular system present, and they're found in aquatic environments. It should be noted that taxonomists use the word thallophyte interchangeably with different types of algae. So you could say this organism is a thallophyte, but it could be bacteria or a protist. So the group thallophyte is very broad. It includes many kingdoms, not just Plantae, but it also includes plant-like protists, so kingdom Protista. The easiest way to remember all of this is thinking about algae. So when you see or hear the word thallophyte, just think algae. So let's look at what algae is again just one more time. So what's algae again? Well, algae can include plants, so kingdom Plantae. It can include organisms found in kingdom Protista, because plant-like protists have photosynthetic pigments. They produce their own organic molecules. It can also include bacteria, so domain Eubacteria, where you have blue-green algae, or cyanobacteria. This is because cyanobacteria also undergoes photosynthesis. But regardless, when you hear or see the word thallophyte or algae, this is what you should think. Number one, it's an informal taxonomic group. It contains many different types of organisms from different kingdoms. But all of these organisms are going to be found in aquatic environments, and they can be uni or multicellular. So you can have eukaryotic organisms here as well as prokaryotic like bacteria. The hallmark feature here though is that it's going to undergo photosynthesis. So whatever type of algae you're looking at, it's going to be photosynthetic, but they're not going to have a vascular system. So no plant tissues like leaves, roots, and stems. So that's why a thallophyte you can think of as algae, because there's no body differentiation, there's no plant tissues. What about you do have a plant body and differentiated body parts? Well, then you're a bryophyte or a tracheophyte. Now this takes us to the second criteria, the second question, which is about a vascular system. So if you do not have a vascular system, you're going to be a bryophyte. If you do, you're going to be a tracheophyte. A way to remember this is tracheophytes and your trachea. So your trachea is that airway to your lungs. Tracheophytes have a vascular system, meaning they have tubes. So a trachea is a tube. Tracheophytes have tubes because they have a vascular system. I don't know, it sounds dumb, it is, but it worked for me. Okay, let's take an in-depth look at a bryophyte. So we do have that plant body, we do have body differentiation, but we do not have a vascular system. That's going to be important for transportation of substances. So like water, think about it, a long big tree with leaves has to transport that water from the roots all the way up to the top of its leaves. That's not going to happen with a bryophyte because we do not have that vascular system. So that means they cannot grow vertically. They have to grow horizontally. So all this moss over here, horizontal, close to the ground, close to the water. To help absorb water, they have structures called rhizoids. They're these hair-like projections on the underside of the plant. With no vascular system, it's no wonder that they're found in aquatic environments, being close to that source of water, also found in moist terrestrial environments as well. Hallmark example of a bryophyte will be moss. So a moss is a bryophyte. It does not have a vascular system, but it does have a plant body. Going back to what we learned with the alternation of generations, bryophytes prefer the gametophyte stage, so they have a dominant gametophyte stage. Remember, the gametophyte stage is a haploid stage, one end meaning one set of chromosomes. If a plant does have a vascular system, it's not going to be a bryophyte, it's going to be a tracheophyte. Tracheophytes are vertical. They can grow vertically because they have that vascular system. They can take in water to their roots, send it up their trunk, all the way up their branches to their leaves. So they have that vascular system, and that's what allows them to grow vertically and tall, unlike a bryophyte. There's two specialized tissues found within a tracheophyte, and that's going to be the xylem and the phloem. So the xylem is going to transport minerals and water from the roots, so from the bottom of the plant. The way I remember that is xylem starts with an X that's found near the bottom of the alphabet. Roots are found near the bottom. It's going to be sending it up the plant body. Phloem, on the other hand, is dealing with the transport of the carbohydrates produced from photosynthesis. The way I remember this is phloem begins with P, photosynthesis begins with P as well. Unlike bryophytes, they have a dominant sporophyte stage, which is 2N, meaning they have two sets of chromosomes. They are diploid. Now we get to the third criteria, which is seed formation. This is going to differentiate two main groups of tracheophytes. So if you have no seeds, you're going to be a seedless tracheophyte. That's easy enough to remember. If you can produce seeds, you're going to be a seed-bearing tracheophyte. A classic example of a seedless tracheophyte, it's really common on the DAT, is going to be a fern. So it has all those characteristics of a tracheophyte, it just does not produce seeds. Horsetail and club moss are other key examples. This brings us to our last criteria question, and that's going to be flowers, so whether or not the plant produces flowers. If it does not produce flowers, it's going to be known as a gymnosperm. If it does produce flowers, it's going to be an angiosperm. You should also note that gymnosperms bear naked seeds, whereas angiosperms have their seeds inside fruits. And this is a dumb way to remember it, but it works. So people who go to the gym a lot, gymnosperms, right? People who go to the gym a lot, they want to look good when they're naked. So gymnosperms correlate with naked seeds. Okay, so gymnosperms are seed-bearing tracheophytes. They have all those key characteristics that we've talked about so far, but they do not have fruit and they do not have flowers, and their seeds are naked, so their seeds are unprotected by fruit. Classic example of a gymnosperm is going to be a conifer. And the big thing here is going back to alternation of generations. I know you love this topic, right? So they have a dominant sporophyte stage, 2N, diploid, they have 2 sets of chromosomes. They're mostly found in the sporophyte stage. Let's look at angiosperms now. This is going to account for around 90% of all the plants found in nature. Why are they angiosperms? Well, they can produce fruit and they have flowers. Flowers are important because it houses their reproductive organs like the pistil and the stamen. But a key thing here about angiosperms is they can undergo double fertilization. I'm not going to dive into too much detail of what double fertilization is, but essentially this is what you should know. There's 2 sperm cells, so 2 male gametes. The first one's going to fuse with the egg, and that's going to form a diploid zygote. The second one is going to fuse with a polar nuclei. Now this is going to develop into the endosperm. These 2 key events together is what is known as double fertilization. Again, this is unique to angiosperms, and that's what you should know for taxonomy on the DAT. One more thing that you should know, then we're done with plant taxonomy. Angiosperms can be divided into 2 groups, a monocotyledon and a dicotyledon, or sometimes just referred to as monocots and dicots. These are angiosperms though, so that's what you should remember. So if you see the word monocotyledon and you're like, what the heck is that? Just remember, this is an angiosperm, so it has a plant body, it has a vascular system, it produces seeds, and it has flowers. Now let's talk about the difference between a monocotyledon and a dicotyledon. So you're probably wondering, what the heck is a cotyledon? A cotyledon is sometimes referred to as an embryonic leaf. It's the first leaf to appear from a germinating seed. Essentially what it is just a nutrient storage tissue during embryonic development of a plant. Now monocots just have 1 cotyledon that appears, whereas dicots, makes sense, has 2 cotyledons that appear. The vascular system of a monocot is going to be parallel. It has parallel veins, so they run in tandem with each other. Unlike a dicot that has net-like veins, so a net-like vascular system. The monocot vascular system is going to be scattered throughout the plant, whereas a dicot vascular system is going to be always found in a ringed formation. Then lastly, dealing with flowers, because these are both angiosperms, monocots have flowers in multiples of 3, so 3, 6, 9. Whenever you see a plant that has a flower with a multiple of 3 on it, it's a monocot. Dicots, on the other hand, have flowers in multiples of 4 or 5. And that is Kingdom Plantae summed up. So most of us haven't really taken a botany class before, so just remember those 4 criteria, those 4 questions that you should ask yourself. Does it have a plant body? Does it have a vascular system? Can it make seeds? And does it produce flowers or not? And then if it can, if it's an angiosperm, is it a monocot or a dicot? Anyways, great job you guys. We have made it through 3 out of the 4 kingdoms in domain Eukarya. The next kingdom is a big one. It's Kingdom Animalia.